Hello and welcome to my channel, From Gaming with Love. This video is going to be a bit of an offshoot from my normal content. Most of you who have subscribed and a lot of viewers on my channel are here for the cinematic trailers and machinima. This one's going to be coloring outside the lines quite a bit. It's not going to be for everybody, but it is coming up to a new year, new me, and quite frankly, I thought this was worth talking about for a few minutes. Long story short, guys, some of you might know I've been a firefighter for almost 20 years. It'll be 20 years in March. And in that amount of time, I've gone through an incredible amount of training. But over the years, one of the things that I had realized that we didn't get a lot of training, actually scratch that, we didn't get any training on whatsoever, is dealing with people in emotional crisis or in crisis of any description. Most of what a crisis is the way a person feels about a certain condition, whether it's a physical or environmental situation that they're embroiled in. I'm going to take the next 10 minutes or so and I'm going to build this out a little bit. I'm going to give you a little bit of a backstory. Without getting into a lot of the details, I just want to give you some context and where this video is coming from. Last year in August, my wife and I were on a trip out on the West Coast and we were going underneath the Lions Gate Bridge, which looks an awful lot like the Golden Gate Bridge. And as we were going underneath the bridge, my wife spotted a jumper sitting on the handrail. Without going into a lot of that detail, guys, there's an incredible story there, and it was tragic and yet illuminating at the same time. The jumper ended up deciding to take his life and landed about 50 feet off the boat. And now, of course, as a firefighter and with even the slimmest chance of him potentially surviving, there was a guy, I can't think of his name off the top of my head, his last name is Hines. He survived the jump from the Golden Gate Bridge. He goes into a lot of detail in a documentary that he did and said, you know, as soon as his hand, I'm getting goosebumps right now, actually just talking about this, but as soon as his hand left that handrail, he was filled with instant regret. So this guy hit the water. Another nearby boat, I'd called in the mayday over the radio. I needed some help, and another boat had pulled up, a small little fishing trawler, or a little fishing boat had pulled up beside us. We pulled him out of the water, got him on their transom basically, and I did CPR on him until the Coast Guard showed up. And I'll never know if he ended up surviving, probably not. He was an older gentleman, and ultimately the impact that had was something that I was prepared to deal with, but I was actually with my wife and her youngest stepson as well. That was a lot for them to deal with, and I wasn't sure how to deal with that myself. Not to mention the fact there were the two dudes that were on the fishing boat that I jumped on to do CPR on this guy for 10 minutes. Those guys, there was an impact there as well. How do I deal with that? There'd been incidents similar to that on and off the job that I'd encountered where there was no work to be done on the person that was at the epicenter of the incident. But there was so much collateral damage all around me that I didn't know how to deal with. And I have to admit, I'm a bit ashamed to have to tell you that not knowing what to do, and without any work to be done, work that I was familiar with doing, I walked away. I turned my back on a lot of people, and I carry a lot of guilt around for that. So one of the things that I needed to do from that, or one of the things that I've been trying to do for years now, since I'd started realizing there's a real gap in our training, was to do a little bit more, to get more training, to get more experience and exposure to helping people in crisis. And the easiest way, or the most direct route that I found, was to volunteer for a local crisis line. Now, interestingly enough, one of the people who had really inspired me to go that route was Chris Voss, and he was a international hostage negotiator. And I read his book and highly recommend his book, Never Split the Difference. When he was originally an FBI agent and wanted to go into crisis negotiation or hostage negotiation, his boss told him, I'd go and volunteer for a crisis line and come back and talk to me again if you still want to be a negotiator. And he did, and it was so interesting because so many of the things he talked about, and in my experience and being on the line since roughly last November of 2021, so many of the things that he talks about, I thought they were unique experiences, but it's been really amazing. So I went in and started training with the local crisis line, and it was about a month's worth of training where they teach us about one specific system in particular called the Roberts model. Now, the Roberts model, if you look it up, just lines up very straightforward steps that you can take either for yourself or that you can recommend for your friend or family member or person that you care about that's in crisis. That's a little bit more meaningful. Let's call it a lot more meaningful than thoughts and prayers, and sorry to hear about that. So first things first, what I'll encourage you to do, I'm going to have a link to the Roberts model in the video description so that you can see what it is. And the first couple steps is really about connecting with somebody and figuring out what it is that's happening and giving yourself a bit of an idea what you're dealing with. A lot of what that involves is empathy and validating a person's feelings. I can't imagine what you must be going through. I'm very sorry to hear that this has happened to you. I know it must be so difficult to talk about. I'm so glad that you've reached out to me and that you're opening up to me about this. These are all different ways that we can help to establish that connection. Guys, establishing that connection is so important, and even if it's the only thing that you can do is validate the way a person feels about something, that's a huge step in the right direction. We're not going to fix the thing. We're not engaging with people to fix the thing. And this is, as a firefighter, this is actually what's very difficult, because quite often we're there to make the thing go away. And when we're in that mindset, it's very difficult to step back in the interest of just connecting to somebody and just validating how they feel. But that is a really big first step. The next really critical element to consider, and it kind of depends on how far you're going to go into the conversation, but really what you need, crisis is very seldom just one thing. It's quite often a combination of different factors that, when all combined together, just result in this overwhelming force. A lot of people are tempted to try and deal with everything all at once, and quite frankly, that's not a great way to tackle it. What we need people to start reflecting on is what's the one thing that if you resolved it, you'd have the greatest positive impact on the overall problem. And once you've nailed down that one thing, now all of a sudden we can start looking at resources that can help a person overcome the stress that relates to that item. At work, if you're dealing with a coworker, quite often they may have an EFAP or an employee family assistance program of some description or another, and that may be an avenue that you can recommend. Locally, I know where I am, 211 is a relatively new service. Relatively, I put rabbit ears on that. In the US, it seems like it's a more established system, but 211, in terms of resources, social accessible or social support resources that anybody can get for free. Some things you got to apply for, but ultimately 211 is that virtual Rolodex. It is your directory of social support services. Highly recommend it. Sometimes, people will call 211 and they just need a little bit of, support. So 211 will refer people to the crisis line. And quite often people who call the crisis line, we figure out what that one thing is and then point them towards 211. So that is definitely a resource that's available. As you narrow down to that one thing, make that recommendation. 211 gets a lot of people a lot of help. Exploring our alternatives is essentially, 5 or 6 critical steps or critical considerations that can be taken to help give a person sort of the direction that they need, that they can follow, where they see that there's more options than just getting professional help. So many people are like, go to a psychologist, go to a psychiatrist, go to a doctor, get some meds. And sometimes that's what's required, guys, don't get me wrong, but sometimes there are some other options, and we're going to talk about those now too. First thing is about identifying triggers. And I'm not talking about people being triggered about everything. I don't care about that so much, but there are certain times where a person gets pushed, gets their head pushed underwater by a certain trigger, by a certain thing, or by being exposed to something. And I'm going to tell you this, guys, and I'm going to tell you this, and I'm even going to raise my voice, and I'm even making a fist right now. Social media is a massive trigger for a lot of people. There is so much confrontation and so much negativity circling. And we're looking at the phone, we're looking at our phones as soon as we wake up, we're looking at the phones, we're looking at the news, we're looking at all the people who are getting killed, we're looking at all the people that don't agree, we're looking at all this stuff and we're like, holy mackerel, you just start out feeling like trash. So I'm just going to say that. Other times there are other triggers that if you thought about it, you may be able to identify certain things that if you just kept those things at a distance, you'd get yourself from where you are to another point of strength where you're more prepared to deal with that thing. So identify the triggers, try and separate yourself from it. This isn't always going to be possible, but ultimately it's the first consideration. Second thing that's on our list is self-care. And quite frankly, this is why there's a video of sailing on in the background. The sailing is my happy place. That's where I go, where I'm the happiest that I've ever been in my life. And guys, it's so important that you consider self-care from top to bottom. It can be reading a book, it can be watching the movie, it can be going sailing, it can be listening to music, going for a drive. Guys, just do the thing. Get the nice thing, get the bauble, get the game, get the new shirt, get the shoes, get the thing that you like. Doesn't have to be a big thing, but it has to be something that makes you feel good about being alive, and that's such a big step. So often, what we're dealing with and, one of the biggest challenges a person can have is just caring enough about themselves to take any steps whatsoever. And you get yourself in that frame of mind if you're always in that negative mindset. Literally, these neural pathways get formed and it's very difficult to break out of those negative cycles. But just little bits and pieces, getting in that shower, having that nice experience, actually going in and setting up little tasks for the morning that you can achieve, that you can accomplish, little tiny missions. Make the bed. Admiral McRaven was one of his top recommendations in his book, because you make your bed, you get something accomplished right at the beginning of the day. If you have a shitty day, like he says, you have a crappy day, you come back to a bed that's made. And with that comes some hope that tomorrow will be better. Make your bed, put on the stuff, smell nice. It's a great way to start the day. And each one of those things is a mission complete. Number 3 is friends. The friend connection that we're making now is a way of distracting. Most crisis relates to how it is that we feel about something in particular. And if we have friends that we enjoy spending time with, to be able to distract us away from the negativity associated to whatever the epicenter of this thing is. All we need is to go out with some friends, hang out, have some fun, and with that, feeling a little bit more positive about things, it gives us a new perspective on how to deal with these things that are bogging us down. One thing that I will recommend, guys, I don't make a secret of the fact that I've had some substance abuse issues, particularly alcohol in the past, and it was a boat anchor that weighed me down on every effort that I made to try and care enough to do anything. So when we're going out with friends, I would highly recommend that the activity of choice not be to go down to the local bar and drink a whole bunch. Because as much fun as you feel like you're having at the time, the next morning is going to suck, and a lot of these negative feelings, will start to get back into that as we're feeling all hungover and shitty. So be mindful of that. Find something else to do. Don't lean on the alcohol. Don't even put yourself in the environment where you're sitting there saying you're not going to drink, and your friends can all get hammered and you're going to be the designated driver, unless that makes you feel good. That's part of that self-care piece. But ultimately, being surrounded by people drinking and being, how that can make you, and while you're struggling with things, can be a little counterproductive. So I'd leave the booze out of it if I were you. Number 4 is our family and close friends. So these are people who you would expect would come to you if they were feeling the same way. It's not every friend, it's not every family member, could be a trusted coworker, but ultimately these are people who are finally divulging this stuff too. And guys, this is what this video is for. If one of your friends or one of your family members or one of your coworkers comes to you and they're feeling like this is where this conversation is going to be important. So you're able to actually open up and confide in these people, and getting a little bit of reinforcement and some support from them and some empathy from people that you care about, that can go a really long way. Number 5 is your professional help. This is your doctors, psychologists, psychiatrists, you name it, all of these professional support services. One of the next steps here is develop and formulate an action plan. All this is doing is summarizing what it is that you've come through those last 6 steps, or 5 steps technically. It's kind of summarizing the conversation to allow them to go and get started on whatever it is that you've decided, whether it's the triggers, the self-care things that they're going to do, the friends that they're going to go out with, the family that they're going to confide in, and maybe the medical help that they're going to seek. And the follow-up plan and agreement, that would essentially just be, hey, if you need any help, need a little bit more guidance, don't ever hesitate to give me a call. To close this up, this is a little bit longer than I expected, but I'm always happy to answer questions on this, to give people some direction in terms of finding other resources that you may be able to access to be able to help people out there. We're all going to need it. As we wade into 2023, who knows what's around the corner. The last few years has been pretty tough on a lot of people. Guys, thanks for listening. Thanks for the support on the channel. I'm really enjoying the experience, and I'm starting to see a little bit more feedback, and it's really what I wanted from a self-care perspective, that interaction with people from all over the world with common interests and just kind of digging the stuff that I'm doing. It's a real boost for me, so keep it up. Thanks a ton, guys. See you on the other side.